What happens when a dream is shattered into 1,000 pieces? Does the spirit break along with it, scattering like dust in the wind, or does it somehow find a new way to fly, piecing itself together into something stronger, something unexpected? We are told that our defining moments are the victories, the medals, the applause. But what if our true purpose is forged not in the spotlight, but in the shadows of what we have lost? This is a story about a woman the world had written off, a broken athlete in a forgotten corner of a world built on strength. But they had mistaken her scars for weakness, and they were about to learn that the most unbreakable foundations are often built from the fragments of a ruined past. Anya Petrova moved through the cavernous military gymnasium like a ghost, her presence marked only by the faint scent of lemon-scented cleaner, and the rhythmic squeak of her mop bucket's wheels. Her movements were economical, precise, a stark contrast to the explosive, often clumsy, energy of the soldiers who trained here during the day. She kept her head down, the hood of her gray sweatshirt pulled low, a curtain of anonymity she desperately clung to. To the elite Special Forces candidates who sweated and bled on these mats, she was invisible, a part of the building's infrastructure, no more significant than a light fixture or a water fountain. But Anya saw everything. As she wiped down the climbing ropes, her fingers traced the fibers, and her mind's eye saw a young recruit, his shoulders hunched forward, his core disengaged, pulling with his arms and straining his rotator cuff with every upward heave. She saw the inevitable fraying, not just of the rope, but of his own body. While cleaning the glass of the weight room, she watched a soldier grunt through a heavy deadlift, his back rounding dangerously, his hips rising too fast. She felt a sympathetic twinge in her own spine, a phantom echo of the forces he was misdirecting. She could almost hear the microscopic tears in his lumbar muscles, the compression of his vertebrae. They saw a cleaner, she saw a symphony of biomechanical errors, a chorus of injuries waiting to happen. Her world had once been the polar opposite of this. It had been a world of impossible heights, of chalk dust glittering in the spotlights, of the collective gasp of a breathless arena. Anya Petrova had been a gymnast, not just a gymnast, but a phenomenon. A prodigy of balance and air, she was destined for gold, her name already whispered with the reverence reserved for legends. Her body was a finely tuned instrument, and she was its virtuoso conductor. She understood its language, its limits, its soaring potential. Then came the sound. It wasn't loud, not to the thousands watching. But to Anya, suspended in midair during a complex tumbling pass, it was a gunshot. A sickening, intimate snap in her ankle, followed by a fire that consumed her leg, and a brutal, unceremonious reunion with the floor. The dream didn't just die, it was executed. The doctors used words like catastrophic, comprehensive, and irreparable. They pieced her ankle back together with titanium screws and plates, but they couldn't piece back the life she had known. They gave her a permanent limp and a future she had never imagined. The recovery was a private hell. Physical therapy was a mockery of the effortless grace she once possessed. Learning to walk without a severe limp was her new Olympics, a gold medal she would never win. The world of gymnastics, with its bright lights and soaring music, moved on without her. She was old news, a cautionary tale whispered among new prodigies. So she had run. She ran from the pitying looks, from the well-meaning friends whose every word felt like a reminder of her failure. She took a job that demanded nothing of her past, a role where no one would know her name, or the ghost of the girl who could fly. She chose invisibility. Here, in the heart of a military base, she was safe in her anonymity. But the master of the body could not simply turn off her mind. And so she watched. She saw these men, the supposed pinnacle of human performance, treating their bodies like blunt instruments. They were strong, incredibly so, but they were also brittle. They trained for power but neglected the foundation that sustained it. They built engines, as she often thought to herself, without ever reinforcing the chassis. And every night, as she cleaned up the remnants of their grueling day, the discarded tape, the sweat-soaked towels, the faint smell of liniment, she saw the ghosts of their future injuries, the shadows of careers that would be cut short, just like hers. Her limp was a constant, dull ache, a metronome marking the slow, steady rhythm of her new life. But the sharpest pain was in her eyes, in the keen, analytical gaze that couldn't stop seeing the fractures in the world around her, a world that no longer had a place for her particular genius. She was a master architect in a city that had no more buildings to raise, a silent observer in a kingdom of the blind. Colonel Marcus Thorne slammed the manila folder onto his polished oak desk, the sharp crack echoing the fracture in his patience. The report's cover page was stark: medical discharge, Sergeant Frank Miller, another one. That was the third top-tier candidate this month to wash out of the Special Forces qualification course, not from lack of heart, but from a body that had simply given out. Miller had a herniated disc. Before him, it was a promising lieutenant with shredded knee cartilage, and before that, a corporal with chronic, debilitating stress fractures in both shins. Thorne ran a hand over his tired face, the gray at his temples seeming more pronounced with each new report. He was the commander of one of the most elite units in the world, responsible for forging the tip of the spear, and his spear was breaking before it was even sharp. He stared out his window at the training grounds, where another group of hopefuls was being run through the ringer. He could hear the guttural, relentless barking of his lead instructor, Master Sergeant Rex "Bulldog" Davies. Davies was a legend in his own right, a decorated veteran of multiple conflicts, a man carved from granite and fueled by black coffee and raw aggression. His philosophy was simple and brutal: break them down to build them back up. The problem, Thorne thought grimly, was that they were breaking and not coming back. He had called this meeting for a reason. A moment later, the door opened and Davies entered, his posture ramrod straight, his jaw set like a vice. He was the physical embodiment of his own training doctrine, immense, powerful, and utterly inflexible. "You wanted to see me, Colonel." Davies's voice was gravelly, a low rumble that commanded attention. "Sit down, Rex," Thorne said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. He pushed Miller's folder across the polished surface. "Miller's out. L4, L5 herniation. The doctors say his career as an operator is over before it began." Davies picked up the folder but didn't open it. He grunted. "It's a shame. The kid had heart. But this new generation, they're not built the same." "Softer." Thorne leaned forward, his eyes locking onto his master sergeant's. "Softer." Rex Miller was a collegiate wrestling champion. The man's pain tolerance is off the charts. The lieutenant we lost last week was an All-American track star. "These are not soft men, with all due respect, sir," Davies countered, his tone bordering on insubordinate. "The course is the course. It hasn't changed in 20 years. It's designed to find the breaking point. If their breaking point is too low, they don't belong here. It weeds out the weak. That's the entire point, but it's not weeding out the weak, it's creating the broken." Thorne's voice rose, the frustration boiling over. "We are losing our best prospects to preventable injuries. We're spending millions on recruitment and preliminary training only to have our most promising soldiers medically discharged. Our attrition rate from physical breakdown is higher than our academic or psychological failure rate. We are a machine that is systematically destroying its own finest parts. Does that sound like a successful program to you?" Davies's expression hardened. To him, this was a critique of his life's work. "My job is to forge weapons, Colonel. Forging involves fire and a hammer. It's not a pretty process. Pain is part of it. Pain is weakness leaving the body. I'm not talking about pain, Rex, I'm talking about permanent, career-ending damage," Thorne shot back, his voice low and intense. "We're not building resilience, we're building chronic injuries. There's a difference. We need to find a smarter way." "A better way." Davies finally opened the folder and glanced at the medical summary. He snorted, a short, sharp sound of derision. "Smarter. We need men who can carry a 100-pound pack for 30 miles after being awake for 72 hours and still be able to win a firefight. You don't get that from yoga and meditation, sir. You get that by pushing them past what they think is possible. You get it with grit." Thorne sank back into his chair, the energy draining from him. It was like arguing with a brick wall. Davies saw the world in black and white, strong and weak, hard and soft. He couldn't see the nuance, the subtle mechanics that underpin true, sustainable strength. The master sergeant believed that the only way to build a skyscraper was to use bigger and bigger hammers, ignoring the cracks forming in the foundation. Thorn knew something had to change, but he had no idea what. He was a strategist, a leader of men, not a kinesiologist. He was trapped, responsible for a system that he could see was failing but lacked the specific expertise to fix. As Davies stood to leave, his point made, Thorn felt a profound sense of despair. He was losing good men, failing his mission, and the only solution his top expert could offer was to hit them even harder. That night the base was quiet, the moon casting long shadows across the empty parade ground. Thorn couldn't rest. The problem gnawed at him. He found himself walking the deserted hallways, his footsteps echoing, eventually leading him back to the source of his frustration, the main training gymnasium. He just wanted to stand there, to think, to try and see what he was missing. And that's when he saw her. The gymnasium was vast and silent, the air still thick with the lingering metallic tang of sweat and effort. Under the dim glow of the overnight security lights, Colonel Thorn saw a lone figure moving at the far end of the floor. It was the cleaner. He'd seen her around, a quiet, almost spectral presence who materialized after hours and vanished before dawn. She was just a part of the scenery. Tonight, however, she wasn't mopping. He stopped in the shadows of the entryway, his curiosity piqued. She had laid one of the thin blue gymnastics mats on the floor. Believing she was completely alone, she moved with a purpose that startled him. She kicked off her worn sneakers and began a series of movements unlike anything he had ever seen. It wasn't yoga, it wasn't stretching, it was something else entirely. She moved with agonizing slowness, a deliberation that spoke of immense control. She would extend her leg, the one he now noticed she favored, holding it ruler straight just an inch off the ground. Her entire body was tensed, but it was a controlled tension, every muscle fiber seemingly engaged in a single, unified purpose. Thorn, a man who had witnessed peak human performance his entire career, found himself mesmerized. He could see the faint tremor in her muscles, the sheer effort it took to maintain such perfect form. This wasn't about strength in the way his men understood it, explosive and violent. This was about endurance, stability, and an almost terrifying level of body awareness. She transitioned from one position to another with a liquid grace that was utterly contradicted by the subtle, ever-present limp he saw when she put weight on her left ankle. It was a paradox in motion, incredible physical discipline housed in a body that was, by all appearances, damaged. He watched for nearly 20 minutes, hidden in the darkness, feeling like an intruder. He saw her work through a routine that was clearly a form of self-designed rehabilitation. She was targeting tiny, stabilizing muscles that he didn't even know existed. She was treating her own body with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a saint. Then, she finished. She stood, took a deep, centering breath, and walked towards the climbing wall, her limp more pronounced now that she was fatigued. She didn't climb. She simply stood before it, her eyes scanning the handholds. She reached out and traced the path a climber might take. Then she stopped. Her head tilted. She mimicked a movement, a reach, a pull, and then her expression soured. She shook her head slightly. She performed the movement again, but this time her body shifted. Her hips dropped, her core tightened, and the imaginary pull came from her back and legs, not her shoulder. It was a minute correction, a barely perceptible shift in alignment, but Thorn understood instantly. She was deconstructing the movement, identifying the point of weakness, the source of inefficiency and potential injury. She saw the flaw. In that moment she ceased to be the cleaner. The gray hoodie and the mop bucket faded from his perception. He saw a master analyst, a genius of human kinetics, hiding in plain sight. An idea, wild and desperate, began to spark in his mind. He stepped out of the shadows. "Excuse me," he said, his voice softer than he intended. Anya froze, a deer caught in headlights. Her body instantly tensed, her shoulders hunching as she pulled the hood of her sweatshirt further over her face. She grabbed the handle of her mop bucket, her only shield. "I'm sorry, sir. I was just finishing up, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. She expected to be reprimanded for using the equipment, for wasting time. Thorne walked closer, his eyes not accusatory, but intensely curious. I wasn't referring to your work, he said. I was watching you. On the mat, a flush of hot shame spread across Anya's face. Her secret, her private ritual of remembering and rebuilding, had been witnessed. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have, don't apologize, Thorne interrupted gently. What was that? That routine, Anya looked down at the floor, unable to meet his gaze. It's nothing. Just some exercises. For my ankle, no, Thorne said, his voice firm but not unkind. That was not nothing, I've been around the world's best athletes my entire life. I've never seen control like that. The precision. What is your name? Anya, she mumbled. Anya Petrova, the name didn't register. It was just a name. Anya, he repeated, testing the sound of it. That correction you just made, for the climbing wall. You shifted the center of gravity and engaged the latissimus dorsi to protect the shoulder joint, didn't you? Anya's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. In all the years since her fall, no one had ever spoken her language. No one had ever seen what she saw. She could only nod, speechless. I'm Colonel Thorne, he said, extending a hand. She hesitated, then wiped her own hand on her jeans before shaking his briefly. Her hand was small but her grip was firm. I have a problem, Anya, Thorne said, getting straight to the point. A big one. I'm losing my best men to injuries. They're strong, they're tough, but they're breaking. I think you know why. Anya's heart was hammering against her ribs. This was impossible. A colonel, the commander of the entire base it seemed, was talking to her, the cleaner, about his training program. I just cleaned the floors, sir, she said weakly, a desperate attempt to retreat back into her shell of invisibility. Thorne's gaze didn't waver. I don't think so. I think you do a lot more than that. I think you watch. I think you see things that my highly paid, expert instructors are completely blind to. I'm asking for your help. The air in the gym was thick with disbelief. Anya stared at him, her mind reeling. Help him? How? What could she possibly do? She was a failed athlete with a ruined ankle who mopped floors for a living. The idea was absurd. It was terrifying. But as she looked at the colonel, she saw something in his eyes she recognized, desperation. It was the same look she saw in her own reflection every morning. He was trapped, just as she was. And in that moment of shared desperation, a tiny, long-dormant spark of purpose flickered within her. He was offering her a chance not just to be seen, but to use the very knowledge that her fall had given her. It was a knowledge born of shattering, a wisdom learned in the breaking. Anya couldn't sleep. Colonel Thorne's words echoed in her mind, a relentless drumbeat against the quiet hum of her small, sparse apartment. I'm asking for your help. It was a request so far beyond the realm of her reality that it felt like a dream, or perhaps a cruel joke. The next morning, she arrived at the base with a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. As instructed, she reported not to the janitorial supply closet but to the command building. The crisp uniforms and clicking heels of the administrative staff made her feel profoundly out of place in her simple jeans and sweatshirt. When she was shown into Colonel Thorne's office, he was waiting with Master Sergeant Davies. The moment Anya saw Davies's face, she knew this was a mistake. His arms were crossed over his massive chest, and his eyes, narrowed into slits, raked over her with undisguised contempt. He saw her worn clothes, her slight frame, her limp. He saw a janitor, and nothing more. Anya, thank you for coming, Thorne began, his tone professional. This is Master Sergeant Davies, my lead instructor for the Q course. Davies didn't offer a hand. He just grunted, a sound of pure dismissal. Master Sergeant, this is Anya Petrova. She has a unique background in elite-level human kinetics, and I have asked her to act as a consultant. She will be observing our training protocols for the next week. Davies's jaw tightened. A consultant. In human kinetics. He said the words as if they were a foreign, distasteful species of insect. Sir, with all due respect, what is her real-world experience? Has she ever been in a firefight? Has she ever carried a wounded man off a mountain? Her expertise is in the mechanics of the human body, Rex, Thorne said, his voice holding a warning edge. It's a perspective we are currently lacking, as evidenced by our injury rates. Davies turned his glare on Anya. So you're the one who's going to tell us how to build soldiers? The cleaning lady. The words were meant to sting, to humiliate her into retreat, and they did. Anya felt the blood rush to her cheeks. She wanted to turn and run, to disappear back into the anonymity of the hallways she knew so well. But then she caught Colonel Thorne's eye. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. He was backing her. He was taking the risk with her. Something inside her, a long-buried spine of defiance forged in years of grueling gymnastics training, began to stiffen. She lifted her chin, her voice quiet but steady. I clean the floors, yes. And from the floor you see the foundation. You see how people stand, how they carry their weight, how they land. And your men are landing wrong. They're breaking themselves. Davies let out a short, incredulous laugh. Is that so? And I suppose you learned that from a mop handle. Before Anya could answer, Thorne intervened. That's enough, Master Sergeant. Your opinion is noted. Anya's role for the next week is non-intrusive. She will observe. She will take notes. She will report directly to me. You will provide her with full access, and you will instruct your staff and the candidates to give her their cooperation. Is that understood? The command was clear and absolute. Davies's face was a mask of thunderous fury. He shot a final, withering look at Anya before snapping to attention. Crystal, sir, he said, the word dripping with sarcasm. He turned on his heel and left the office, the door clicking shut with military finality. Anya was left alone with the colonel, her heart still pounding. I apologize for that, Thorne said wearily. Change is not always welcome, especially in this world. He represents the old guard. He believes what he's doing is right. He thinks I'm a joke, Anya said softly, the truth of it hanging in the air. Let him, Thorne replied, his gaze firm. Your work will speak for itself. I saw what you can do. I saw how you see. Go out there, Anya. Watch. And then come back and tell me what's wrong with my program. He handed her a simple clipboard and a pen. It felt heavier than any piece of gymnastic equipment she had ever held. It was a burden and an opportunity, all at once. The week that followed was one of the most difficult of her life. She was a ghost of a different sort now. No longer invisible, she was instead a target of suspicion and mockery. She stood on the sidelines of the brutal training exercises, her clipboard in hand, a small, quiet figure in a world of noise and aggression. The candidates, taking their cue from Davies and his instructors, either ignored her completely or shot her smirks and whispered jokes. Hey, don't trip, the consultant might write you up for bad form, one quipped to another. Davies was a constant, intimidating presence. He would often stand near her, arms crossed, watching her watch the men. See anything interesting, Professor, he'd sneer. Notice how they're sweating. That's part of the process. It's called work. Anya never responded. She simply watched and she wrote. She filled page after page with her small, neat handwriting and precise diagrams. She noted the way recruits favored one leg on long runs, creating a subtle imbalance that would travel up the kinetic chain to their hip and lower back. She diagrammed the improper shoulder rotation on the obstacle wall, the excessive spinal flexion during litter carries. She saw the repetitive, high-impact jumps onto hard surfaces, performed by men already exhausted, their stabilizing muscles failing. It was a textbook on how to systematically destroy the human body. She was documenting the slow-motion demolition of these elite athletes. One afternoon, she watched a soldier named Corporal Diaz, a young, powerful man who was a favorite of the instructors. He was on the verge of setting a new record for the rope climb. He swarmed up the rope with raw, explosive power. But Anya saw his mistake. On the descent, he was dropping too fast, using his grip to brake, sending jarring shockwaves through his elbows and shoulders. He did it again and again. Anya made a note, Corporal Diaz. Rapid descent on rope. High risk of medial epicondylitis and slap tear. Later that day, she saw Diaz in the mess hall, gingerly rubbing his shoulder, a grimace of pain on his face. He was hiding it, but she saw it. He was another soldier on the fast track to a medical discharge. By the end of the week, her clipboard was full. Her heart was heavy. The problem was worse than she had imagined. It wasn't one or two flawed exercises, it was the entire philosophy. It was a system built on the arrogant assumption that these men were unbreakable, and it was a philosophy that was costing the military its best and brightest. She was ready to make her report. Anya stood before a long conference table in a room reserved for high-level strategic planning. On one side sat Colonel Thorne, his expression neutral and expectant. On the other sat Master Sergeant Davies and two of his senior instructors, their postures radiating skepticism and hostility. Anya felt small and exposed, the sole focus of their attention. Her clipboard lay on the table in front of her, her meticulously compiled notes feeling flimsy and insignificant in the face of their hardened experience. She took a deep breath, the air in the room feeling thick and heavy. Colonel, you asked me to observe your training program and identify potential reasons for the high rate of injury, she began, her voice clearer and stronger than she expected. I believe the issue is not with any single exercise, but with the core philosophy of the training itself. Davies shifted in his chair, a low scoff escaping his lips. Thorne silenced him with a glance. Go on, Anya. Anya picked up a sheet of paper from her clipboard. On it was a simple, hand-drawn diagram of a human skeleton. You are training your men for output, not for stability, she said, her finger tracing the spine. You focus entirely on the large, powerful muscle groups, the engine of the body. You push them to generate more and more force. But you are completely neglecting the smaller, deeper muscles that stabilize the joints and maintain proper alignment, the chassis. She looked directly at Davies. You believe that pain is weakness leaving the body. But there are two types of pain. There is the temporary burn of muscle fatigue, which leads to growth. And there is the sharp, specific pain of joint and connective tissue damage, which leads to failure. Your program does not distinguish between the two. It treats all pain as something to be pushed through, and in doing so, it encourages soldiers to ignore the very warning signs their bodies are giving them. One of the other instructors, a wiry man named Sergeant Wallace, spoke up. They need to be tough. War isn't a physical therapy session. Toughness and durability are not the same thing, Anya countered immediately. A glass bottle is tough. You can hit it with your fist. But it's brittle. Drop it the wrong way, and it shatters. A rubber ball is durable. It can be compressed, twisted, and thrown, and it absorbs the impact and returns to its shape. You are training glass bottles. I am suggesting you can train rubber balls. She laid out another page, this one showing a stick figure performing a box jump. Take this exercise. Your men jump onto a high box and then jump back down, repeatedly. It's a test of explosive power. But 90% of them land with their knees collapsing inward and their backs absorbing the shock. They are driving nails into their own joints with every repetition. A simple change, instructing them to land softly on the balls of their feet, with knees aligned over ankles, and stepping down instead of jumping, would preserve the explosive benefit while eliminating almost all of the damaging impact. Davies finally exploded. This is ridiculous. We're not training ballerinas. We are preparing men for combat. They need to be able to jump off the back of a truck and come up shooting, not worry about whether their knees are perfectly aligned. And how many of them can do that 10 years into their career? Anya shot back, her voice ringing with a passion that surprised everyone, including herself. How many of them will be able to pick up their own children without their back seizing up? You are sacrificing their entire future for short-term performance metrics. You are creating broken veterans. A soldier who is medically discharged at 25 is a failure of the system, not a failure of the man. The room fell silent. Anya's words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. She had gone beyond biomechanics and struck at the moral core of their mission. Colonel Thorne leaned forward, his elbows on the table. He looked at the stack of injury reports on his desk, and then back at Anya. What you're saying, he said slowly, is that we're fundamentally strong, but structurally unsound. Precisely, Colonel, Anya said, her confidence growing. You are building skyscrapers on foundations of sand. It doesn't matter how strong the steel is, eventually, the whole thing will collapse. Davies stood up, his face flushed with anger. This is an insult. To me, to my instructors, and to every man who has ever made it through this course. She comes in here with her little drawings and her fancy words and acts like we know nothing. I've been training soldiers for 25 years. And for 25 years, have you ever considered that there might be a better way? Thorne's question was quiet, but it cut through Davies's anger like a knife. Davies was momentarily speechless. The idea was alien to him. His way was the way. It had been tested by time. I will not have my program dismantled by a civilian with a limp and a textbook theory, Davies declared, his voice low and dangerous. He turned to Anya. What do you know about building a soldier? What do you know about grit, about pushing through when every part of you is screaming to quit? A shadow passed over Anya's face. The memory of the snap, the fall, the cold finality of the diagnosis. The years of grueling, solitary rehab. I know more about it than you think, she said softly. I know what it feels like when your body quits on you. And I know what it takes to rebuild it piece by piece. Grit isn't about ignoring your breaking points. It's about understanding them, respecting them, and then working intelligently to move them. A tense silence filled the room. Thorne saw the impasse. Davies would never accept Anya's philosophy. The old guard would never yield to the new without a fight. He needed proof, something undeniable. All right, Thorne said, his voice decisive. We'll put it to the test. Everyone looked at him. The washouts, Thorne continued, his eyes fixed on Davies. Give her the men who have failed your program. The ones you've written off due to injury or performance plateaus. The ones who are on desk duty, waiting to be medically processed out. Give them to Anya. He turned to her. Anya, do you think you can fix them? Anya's heart leaped into her throat. It was an audacious, impossible challenge. These were the broken pieces, the men the system had already discarded. And what's the test? Davies sneered, sensing a trap he could easily win. The final qualification course, Thorne said. The Crucible, the same 24-hour ordeal that washes out 30% of your healthy candidates. If Anya's squad can complete it, her program gets integrated. We overhaul everything from the ground up. Davies smiled, a cold, predatory grin. It was a fool's bet. Taking his broken toys and trying to make them pass the toughest test on the base. She would fail spectacularly. And if they don't? Davies pressed. Thorne looked at Anya, a silent question in his eyes. Anya met his gaze. This was it. The chance to prove that her brokenness was a source of strength, that her knowledge was real. If they fail, she said, her voice unwavering, then I'll go back to mopping the floors. Davies's smile widened. Deal. The group of men assembled in the small, auxiliary gymnasium looked less like a potential special forces squad and more like the waiting room of a sports medicine clinic. There were 5 of them, the first batch of Thorne's Folly, as Master Sergeant Davies had already derisively christened them. They were the walking wounded, the men who had been chewed up and spit out by the main program. Their faces were a mixture of resentment, cynicism, and despair. They had been told they were getting a second chance, but being handed over to the cleaning lady felt more like a final humiliation. Anya stood before them, her clipboard held loosely in one hand. She wasn't wearing a uniform or a tracksuit, just her usual simple clothes. She looked as out of place as they felt. Leading the pack of skeptics was Sergeant Mike Diesel Riley, a mountain of a man whose promising career was derailed by chronic, crippling back pain. He had pushed through it, embracing the suck, as Davies preached, until one day he simply couldn't stand up straight after a long ruck march. He stared at Anya with open hostility. "So you're the one who's gonna fix us," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "What are you gonna do, teach us how to dust?" Anya ignored the jibe. She looked at each of them in turn, her gaze analytical but not cold. She saw more than just their cynical expressions. She saw the way Riley was unconsciously shifting his weight to protect his lower back. She saw the slight wince on the face of Corporal Chen, a wiry intelligence specialist, as he rotated his shoulder. Chen had failed out due to a persistent shoulder impingement that made climbing and lifting agonizing. There was also Specialist Gage, a young, eager soldier whose dreams were shattered by severe shin splints that made running an impossibility. They were all broken, and they were all experts at hiding their pain, a skill they had learned in a culture that equated pain with weakness. "I'm not here to fix you," Anya said, her voice calm and even. "Your bodies already know how to heal. The program you were in just didn't let them. It taught you to build your houses on a foundation of sand. We're going to pour concrete." The men exchanged disbelieving looks. This was not the motivational speech they were expecting. "My name is Anya," she continued. "For the next 6 weeks, we are not going to lift heavy weights. We are not going to run for miles. We are not going to do a single traditional push-up or pull-up." A murmur went through the small group. Diesel Riley laughed out loud. "Then what the hell are we gonna do? Sit around and sing Kumbaya? The crucible is in 6 weeks. People who are 100% healthy fail that thing. The first thing we're going to do," Anya said, her eyes locking onto Riley's, "is learn how to breathe." The first week was a battle of wills. Anya started them with the absolute basics. She had them lie on their backs, hands on their stomachs, and focus on diaphragmatic breathing. She explained how proper breathing engaged the deep core muscles, the true foundation of all strength. The men fidgeted, sighed, and rolled their eyes. It felt ridiculous, pointless. "This is a waste of time," Riley grumbled on day 2, as Anya had them performing slow, controlled pelvic tilts. "My back isn't getting stronger from lying on the floor." "Your back isn't the problem," Anya replied patiently. "The problem is your weak transverse abdominis and your inactive glutes, which are forcing your lower back to do a job it was never designed for. We're waking up the muscles that have been asleep for years." She was relentless, but not in the way Davies was. She didn't scream or demean. She corrected. She would kneel beside Gage, whose shin splints had made him terrified of any impact, and gently adjust the position of his foot. "Feel that? The pressure should be on the outside edge of your foot, not the inside. You're collapsing your arch." She had Chen stand against a wall and perform tiny, almost imperceptible external rotations with a light resistance band. "Don't use your trap," she'd say softly, her fingers finding the overactive muscle in his neck. "Isolate the infraspinatus. That's the muscle that holds your shoulder in its socket." She was speaking a different language, and slowly, grudgingly, they began to understand. The first breakthrough came with Riley. After 2 weeks of foundational work, glute bridges, bird dogs, dead bugs, Anya finally had him stand in front of a mirror. "I want you to perform a bodyweight squat," she said. Riley scoffed but complied, sinking down. "Stop," Anya commanded. "Look at your back. It's rounding. Your hips are tight. You're not squatting, you're folding." For the next hour, she worked with him. She had him use a band to activate his glutes. She placed a foam roller between his knees to engage his adductors. She had him focus on pushing his knees out and keeping his chest up. Finally, he sank into a perfect, deep squat, his spine perfectly straight. He held it and then stood up. A look of astonishment spread across his face. I didn't feel a thing," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "No pinch. No pain." For the first time in over a year, he had performed a fundamental human movement without his back screaming in protest. It was a small miracle. From that moment on, the atmosphere in the gym changed. The cynicism began to melt away, replaced by a cautious curiosity, which then blossomed into genuine belief. The men started to see that Anya wasn't just giving them exercises, she was giving them back control over their own bodies. She taught them that strength wasn't about how much you could lift, but how well you could move. They progressed from the floor to standing movements, to dynamic stretches, to mobility flows that looked like a slow-motion form of martial arts. They rebuilt their bodies from the inside out. They learned to engage their core before every movement, to connect their minds to their muscles. Their chronic aches and pains began to fade. Gage, the man with the shin splints, found he could jump and land softly, absorbing the impact through his entire body instead of just his lower legs. Chen's shoulder mobility improved dramatically. He could now lift his arms overhead without the grinding impingement that had plagued him for months. Anya introduced them to gymnastics rings, not for muscle-ups, but for stabilization holds, teaching their shoulders a new kind of resilient strength. They didn't build the bulky, armor-plated muscles of the main program candidates. Instead, they became lean, wiry, and efficient. They moved with a quiet confidence, a fluid grace that was utterly alien to the brute force world they had come from. As the 6-week mark approached, Colonel Thorne visited the auxiliary gym. He found the 5 men moving in silent unison through a complex mobility routine. They flowed from deep squats into lunges, into push-ups performed with perfect spinal alignment, into controlled rotations. They looked less like broken soldiers and more like a troupe of elite acrobats. Thorne watched, amazed, as Riley, the man with the ruined back, executed a flawless Turkish get-up with a moderate kettlebell, his movements smooth and powerful. "It's time, Anya," Thorne said quietly, standing beside her. "Are they ready?" Anya watched her squad, her broken squad. She saw the focus in their eyes, the new intelligence in their bodies. They were no longer the cynical, defeated men she had met 6 weeks ago. They were remade. "They're not the same men you gave me, Colonel," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. "They're not just stronger. They're smarter. They're ready." The air on the morning of the crucible was cold and sharp, biting at any exposed skin. A low-hanging mist clung to the ground, shrouding the obstacle course in an ethereal gloom. This was the final gate, a 24-hour marathon of pain and exhaustion designed to separate the operators from the aspirants. It involved miles of running with heavy packs, complex problem-solving under extreme duress, and a series of brutal physical obstacles that tested every measure of strength, endurance, and courage. Master Sergeant Davies stood beside Colonel Thorne at the starting line, a smug, self-satisfied look on his face. He watched as the main program candidates, 30 of the fittest men on the base, fidgeted with their gear, their faces tense with anticipation. Then, he glanced over at Anya's squad. The 5 of them stood slightly apart, a quiet island in a sea of nervous energy. They were leaner than the other candidates, less overtly muscular. To Davies, they looked like a cross-country team that had accidentally wandered into a strongman competition. "Well, this should be entertaining," Davies murmured to Thorne, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Let's see how long the ballerinas last before they need a medic." Thorne didn't respond. His eyes were on Anya, who was giving her men some final, quiet words. She wasn't hyping them up or shouting slogans. She was speaking to each one individually, her hand briefly touching a shoulder or an arm. She was reminding them of their foundations. A horn blared, and the ordeal began. The pack of 30 candidates surged forward, a thunder of boots on gravel, their energy explosive and chaotic. Anya's squad started differently. They didn't sprint. They settled into a steady, rhythmic pace, their strides measured, their breathing controlled. They looked like a pack of wolves, loping along with an efficiency that was almost unnerving. Davies chuckled. "They're already falling behind. Told you the first few hours were a grueling test of endurance, a 10-mile run in full combat gear." As the main candidates pushed a punishing pace, their initial pack began to stretch and break. Men started to grimace, their form deteriorating under the strain. But Anya's squad held their formation, their pace unwavering. Sergeant Riley, the man with the once crippled back, now ran with a perfectly upright posture, his core engaged, his pack seeming like a natural extension of his body. They weren't the fastest, but they were by far the most efficient. By the time they reached the first major obstacle, a towering, 30-foot wall known as the Weaver, several of the main program candidates were already struggling, their energy reserves depleted by the frantic initial pace. The Weaver required soldiers to weave their bodies over and under a series of massive logs. It was a notorious shoulder killer. Davies watched with a critical eye as men grunted and heaved themselves through, using brute arm strength. He saw one candidate's face twist in pain as his shoulder gave a nasty pop. Another washout in the making. Then came Anya's squad. Chen, who once couldn't lift his arm without pain, approached the obstacle with a calm focus. Instead of just pulling with his arms, he initiated the movement from his hips, creating a fluid, snake-like motion. He flowed through the logs, his body a single, connected unit. The rest of his team followed suit, moving with the same uncanny grace. They made it look easy, almost effortless. Davies's smirk began to fade, replaced by a flicker of confusion. The day wore on, a blur of mud, sweat, and escalating exhaustion. The course was taking its toll. Medics were busy treating cramps, sprains, and the early signs of exhaustion among the main group. But Anya's squad seemed to be operating on a different plane. They communicated with quiet efficiency, managed their nutrition and hydration with disciplined precision, and tackled each obstacle with analytical calm. On the litter carry, a brutal exercise where teams had to transport a 200-pound dummy over rough terrain, Riley took command. Instead of the jerky, back-straining lifts that other teams were using, he instructed his men, brace your core first. Drive with the legs. Synchronize. They lifted the casualty in one smooth, coordinated motion, distributing the load perfectly. Colonel Thorne, observing from a command vehicle, was astounded. He was watching a masterclass in applied physics and teamwork. These weren't the broken men he had given Anya. They were a perfectly calibrated machine. The true test came after nightfall. 18 hours in, with the candidates running on fumes, they reached the final obstacle, the monster, a complex series of high walls, rope traverses, and balance beams, all designed to be tackled in a state of near total depletion. This was where most failures happened. This was where Davies expected Anya's team to fall apart completely. One by one, exhausted candidates from the main group failed, unable to summon the strength or coordination to finish. But when Anya's squad arrived, they looked different. They were bone-tired, their faces smeared with mud and grime, but their eyes were clear. They paused, assessed the obstacle, and then began. Gage, the shin splint victim, moved across the balance beams with the poise of a gymnast, his landing soft and controlled. Chen navigated the rope traverses with the fluid strength he had learned on the gymnastics rings. Riley powered over the walls, not with brute force, but with explosive, hip-driven movements. They finished the monster and broke into their steady, loping run towards the finish line. They crossed it not as a straggling group of individuals, but as a cohesive unit, still in formation. They had not only completed the crucible, they had done it with no injuries and with time to spare. A stunned silence fell over the finish area. The remaining instructors and medics stared, dumbfounded. Master Sergeant Davies stood frozen, his face a mask of utter disbelief. The ballerinas had not only survived, they had dominated. They had proven that resilience was not about how much punishment you could absorb, but about how intelligently you could move. Anya was waiting for them just past the finish line. There were no shouts of victory. The 5 men simply came to a halt in front of her, breathing heavily but standing tall. Sergeant Riley, his face streaked with sweat and dirt, looked his instructor in the eye. He gave a single, respectful nod. "Thank you, Anya," he said, his voice raspy with exhaustion. The other 4 echoed him. It was a quiet, profound moment of validation. Colonel Thorne walked over, his face unreadable. He looked at the 5 soldiers, at their exhausted but unbroken bodies. Then he looked at Anya. He didn't smile. He simply said, his voice filled with a deep, resonant respect, "Report to my office at 0800 tomorrow, instructor. We have a program to redesign." In that moment, Anya Petrova was no longer the invisible cleaner. She was no longer the broken gymnast. Her limp was no longer a mark of failure, but a testament to the unique, hard-won wisdom that had just changed the future of the Special Forces. The next morning, the command building buzzed with a new kind of energy. The story of the broken squad had spread through the base like wildfire. The impossible had happened. The men written off as failures had not just passed the crucible, they had set a new standard for performance, finishing with a level of physical integrity never before seen. When Anya walked into Colonel Thorne's office, she was no longer met with suspicion, but with a palpable sense of awe from the administrative staff. This time, Master Sergeant Davies was not in the room. In his place sat the two senior instructors who had been at the initial presentation, Sergeant Wallace among them. Their expressions were no longer skeptical, they were humbled and deeply intrigued. Colonel Thorne gestured for Anya to sit, not across the desk from him, but beside him at the small conference table. It was a gesture of partnership. "The official results are in," Thorne began, his voice formal but with an undercurrent of excitement. "Your squad all passed with exemplary marks. More importantly, their post-course medical evaluations show 0 new injuries. 0. In fact, for Sergeant Riley and Corporal Chen, their pre-existing conditions show measurable improvement. Anya, you haven't just trained soldiers, you've performed a miracle of rehabilitation under the most extreme conditions." Anya simply nodded, absorbing the words. It wasn't a miracle, she thought. It was just logic. It was listening to the body instead of trying to shout it into submission. "Master Sergeant Davies has requested a transfer," Thorne continued, his tone matter of fact. "He is an old warrior, and his methods have their place. But that place is no longer here. The future of this program needs to be smarter, more sustainable. It needs to be your way." He slid a thick binder across the table to her. The cover read, "Special Forces Qualification Course, Revised Training Protocol." "This is a blank slate," Thorne said. "I want you to fill it. I want you to rebuild our entire physical training doctrine from the foundation up. Your principles, stability before strength, movement quality over quantity, durability over brute force, will become the new gospel." Sergeant Wallace, the instructor who had initially challenged her, leaned forward. "Ma'am," he said, the honorific coming naturally now, "we saw what your men did. We don't understand how. We're ready to learn." The transformation was complete. The gatekeepers who had once scorned her were now her eager students. The system that had rejected her was now begging for her knowledge. For the next few months, Anya worked tirelessly with Thorne and his instructors. She didn't just write a new manual, she taught it. She held workshops, breaking down the science of biomechanics in simple, accessible terms. She put the instructors themselves through her foundational exercises, making them feel the activation of their own deep core muscles, the proper alignment of their own joints. She taught them to see with her eyes, to spot the subtle asymmetries, the dangerous movement patterns, the invisible weaknesses hiding beneath impressive strength. The main gymnasium was transformed. Part of it now resembled a physical therapy clinic, with foam rollers, resistance bands and stability balls. The old mantra of "pain is weakness leaving the body" was replaced by a new one Anya had written on the main whiteboard, "Strength is the servant of structure." Build the structure first. The new candidates who entered the program were started on Anya's foundational curriculum. They spent the first 2 weeks on the floor, learning to breathe, to brace, and to move with intention before they ever touched a heavy weight. The results were immediate and revolutionary. Injury rates plummeted by over 80%. Performance metrics across the board, from marksmanship to obstacle course times, began to climb. The soldiers were not just getting through the training, they were getting better, stronger, and more resilient with every passing week. They were becoming the durable rubber balls Anya had spoken of. 6 months after the crucible, Anya stood on a platform in the main gymnasium. Before her was the newest, largest class of Special Forces candidates the base had ever seen, drawn by the program's new reputation for creating truly elite, unbreakable soldiers. Anya was no longer hiding in a gray hoodie. She wore a simple, professional polo shirt with the unit's insignia and tactical pants. She stood tall, her limp present but no longer a source of shame. It was part of her story, the physical reminder of the journey that had brought her here. Colonel Thorne stood at the back of the room, watching. He saw the way the new candidates looked at her, with absolute respect. She was no longer an outsider. She was the architect of their strength, the master of their potential. Anya looked out at the sea of eager faces. "My name is Anya Petrova," she began, her voice clear and confident, echoing through the vast space. "Many of you have heard that I was once a gymnast. You may have heard that my career was ended by an injury. That is true. They told me I was broken. And for a long time, I believed them." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But I learned something in that breaking. I learned that true strength is not the absence of weakness. It is the profound understanding of it. It's not about being invincible, it's about being intelligent. Over the next few months, I am not going to teach you how to be tough. You are already tough. I am going to teach you how to be unbreakable." Welcome to the program. The applause that followed was thunderous, a wave of respect and admiration. It was a different kind of applause than the one she had known in the gymnastics arena. That had been for the girl who could fly. This was for the woman who taught others how to stand strong on the ground. It was deeper. It was more meaningful. It was the sound of a shattered dream being reborn, not as a lesser version of itself, but as something far greater, a purpose that would build and protect, a legacy forged in the heart of what was once lost. A shattered dream doesn't have to be the end of the story. Sometimes it's the beginning of a new one, a stronger one. The world told her she was broken. But in her brokenness, she found a way to build unbreakable people. She found that the knowledge gained from a fall can teach you more than any victory. So, who in your life have you overlooked? Whose hidden genius have you failed to see, simply because they don't fit the mold of what you expect? Whose scars might actually be a roadmap to a strength you can't even imagine? Share this story to remind someone that their greatest strength might just come from their deepest wound. And look around you, because the quietest person in the room might just be the one who can change the world.